Good afternoon. Welcome to the April 9th Public Works and Finance meeting. We're going to get started with our approval of the minutes from March 26th. That's the first item. I've looked them over and they were fine.
I'd move to approve.
Then let's move them.
Brandy
They've been
Sounds good.
Great.
hates them.
Yep.
Our second item, disbursement with Sarah, reporting about the March 2018 payables.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So payables for month ending March 31st, 2018 totaled $2,601,826.89. Major expenditures represented approximately 94%, and that came in at $2,455,097. Payroll was our largest expenditure at $1,427,820. And there's a few other expenditures that were either just a little unusual or just wanted to call out. We had our Whitcomb quarterly contract payment for $136,338. We had our annual Spillman Technologies maintenance contract for $22,339.48. We had a pass-through grant that came in from ITD that belongs to the Moscow Pullman Regional Airport. So we receipted that and then sent it on to Pullman, and that was $12,500. We had our Well 10 Phase 2 contract payment for $41,794 and a Booster Phase 1 payment for $63,986.
I wanted to thank you for the other night when we were going through all that paperwork and you took the time to explain.
Sure.
That helped a lot. I just want you to know it's very necessary when you don't
Absolutely.
spend your time looking at these things and calling out certain things for us to look at. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, and anytime you have questions, I'm here, so.
Anything you want to bring up or questions about?
It looks pretty good to me. I didn't see any extra zeros on the end of anything. so.
Or extra names?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No large expenditures with my name on them, so
Okay.
proceed.
So we shall sign the disbursements report for this month. I can't believe the second quarter's already. Yeah, I feel like we just did this. All right, so now that we've done the disbursements for March, third item is the second quarter financial report.
Yes. So looking at the second quarter financials, our revenues came in at about 30% and expenditures 27%. If you go through, since I know that you're still kind of new, there's some things I thought I'd point out, and if you want me to continue to explain more, I can.
Okay.
With general fund, everything's pretty on. We're about right at 50%, which is where we should be. Streets, our revenues are about 37%, and that's because at this point, with our highway user tax, we've only received approximately 27% of that. So it's going to be a little bit lower. With our salaries and benefits, those are a little lower because we had a light snow season. And so what we had budgeted for the part-time wages with that is it's come in a lot less. With Parks and Rec and the play fields, our expenses are low because that's seasonal. So you're going to see in the summer months, along with just like our capital projects and stuff, you're going to see all those expenses amp up. And by by our third quarter, around 75% is when we start to catch up. Let's see. I think that's kind of mainly the main ones. With our transit center, the operations, at this point, we've only spent 1% of the maintenance budget with that, so that's why that's so low. And otherwise, everything else is pretty well on.
Do you have anything to add,
No, ma'am, it's right on schedule.
Randy?
No questions?
I'm happy with it.
All right.
Thank you for the explanation, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so our action is to approve the report. Would you like to move?
I would move to approve the second quarter financial report.
Second?
Okay, it's approved.
All right, thank
All
you.
right, thank you, Sarah. All right, Tim Davis, Solid Waste Transportation and Disposal, item 4. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Tim.
I wanted to briefly start with just a little bit of history. The city of Moscow began exporting their municipal solid waste back in 1993. At that time, the United States Environmental Protection Agency had adopted the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act Subtitle D regulations, which revised minimum federal criteria that included non-hazardous landfill restrictions, facility design and operation requirements, groundwater and landfill gas monitoring requirements, financial assurance requirements, as well as closure and post-closure care requirements of landfills. The requirements also included composite liner systems for both the landfill base and cap, and installation of leachate collection and treatment systems, as well as installation and monitoring of groundwater and gas wells, just to name a few. The implementation of these Subtitle D regulations affected existing and lateral expansions of MSW landfills that received waste on or after October 9th of 1993. At that time, the EPA essentially gave existing landfills, as we had, the directive to come into compliance with these regulations or discontinue accepting waste, and basically put a final soil cover and close the MSW landfill. Moscow, like many other smaller municipalities at that time, chose to close the MSW landfill because of the costs involved to become compliant with Subtitle D and based on the relatively small amount of waste tonnage that we were landfilling. It made it cost prohibitive to operate and maintain an MSW landfill to those stringent standards and requirements. So the city made the decision back in '93 to begin exporting its MSW to a regional landfill that was Subtitle D compliant. This still remains the most cost-effective, viable, and efficient option for Moscow's waste now and for the foreseeable future. The original 1993 contract was awarded to Waste Management, which had anticipated opening a new regional landfill 74 miles to the west of Moscow in Adams County down in the Washtenaw-Hooper area. And they had bid the Moscow project based on that premise. The Adams County Regional Landfill did not come to fruition, which obligated Waste Management to haul Moscow's waste much further than anticipated to their Columbia Ridge landfill in Arlington, Oregon, which was 224 miles away from Moscow. So Moscow's been very fortunate over the years since to pay transportation and disposal rates based on a 148-mile round trip rather than the actual 448-mile round trip that it originally had to take. Empire Disposal of Colfax, Washington was the original subcontractor providing the hauling services for Waste Management on the Moscow project. Empire Disposal was later acquired by Waste Connections, which inherited that contract haul through that acquisition. Waste Management, with City of Moscow approval, assigned that Moscow transportation and disposal contract over to Waste Connections back in 2009. Waste Connections owns Finley Buttes Regional Landfill in Boardman, Oregon. Hauling Moscow waste to their own landfill in Boardman reduced the round trip by approximately 40 miles. And Waste Connections put further cost-cutting measures into place by switching to 53-foot aluminum chip trailers capable of hauling 23% additional volume per load, reducing the number of loads and the frequency of loads. Last year, Waste Connections was approached by staff about extending the current transportation and disposal contract under the existing terms, but they insisted that extension be tied to a fuel peg or fuel surcharge escalator. Under that scenario, the city would be put into a vulnerable position due to the uncertainty of fluctuating fuel costs. Having won 5 One final 5-year option remaining on the existing contract is leverage. Staff issued a request for proposal to provide solid waste transportation and disposal services as an opportunity to competitively test the market for a longer-term contract. 2 proposals were received and evaluated by a committee consisting of City Supervisor Gary Reedner, City Attorney Mia Vowles, myself, Latah County Solid Waste Coordinator Amanda Bashaw, and Whitman County Solid Waste Director David Nails. The committee unanimously rated the proposal from Finley Buttes Limited Partnership, a subsidiary of Waste Connections and current contractor for the City of Moscow, as the most favorable proposal. Some of the general terms of the proposal include a cost of service of $51.75 per ton, which is an increase of approximately $1.20 to $1.30 per ton over the existing rates beginning October 1st, 2018. This is a very favorable rate and is not tied to fuel cost escalators. Annual adjustments will be based, as they are now, on 80% of the fluctuation of the consumer price index. The initial term would be 7 years with 2 additional 5-year options. These term options allow the city some flexibility. The initial term would run 2 years longer than our last 5-year option, and then we would have 2 5-year options on top of that. So it leaves us some flexibility should some other opportunity come our way. The proposal provides potentially 12 additional years of service over the existing contract and positions Moscow comfortably into the future with one of the most favorable waste transportation and disposal rates in the Pacific Northwest for municipalities that long haul their waste. That's my spiel, if you've got any questions.
I appreciated in the documents, it talked about, on 4A, about how much we're growing, how much, from 2015 to 27 tonnage, and it looks like we're growing about a ton a year. Did you do that projections in that, and does any of that happen in the contract? Did they ever say, well, once you reach,
No,
25?
there's no tonnage guarantees. Either way.
Yeah, that's what I wondered.
More or less. That's the way the proposal was put together. The last 3 years, we have seen increases. I also did a 10-year average in the RFP that showed a pretty consistent tonnage. But there is some things happening, and I think Moscow's growing a little bit, so.
Well, it just made me wonder, now that we have the single stream, if the single stream wasn't in these numbers, so I wondered how that you kind of accounted for the change.
The change.
Using the single stream.
Change in volume of
Yes. the
waste.
volume.
Less
Thanks.
garbage because of single stream.
Yeah.
Basically, what we do is we track everything that's collected, recyclables and waste tonnage, as well as tonnage that's buried at the non-MSW landfill. And I've got a spreadsheet that goes back to 2003 that breaks everything down into very small
Increments,
quantities.
yeah.
So basically, all I did was just pull numbers, historical data.
Okay. Yes.
One of the reasons that we were able to leverage that first contract was because as Tim indicated, our waste tonnage is really small compared to City of Portland, City of Vancouver, City of Seattle, where they send a lot of their garbage down river or upriver to these Columbia Ridge landfills in the Columbia Gorge. Because it's a semi-arid climate, they're Subtitle E compliant, they handle huge amounts of waste. So the RFP that Tim devised included capacity, included financial wherewithal. Were they able to complete the contract? Republic landfill or Republic Waste Systems was the other response to the RFP. They're the ones who are handling Whitman County's garbage and their shipping. They ship from the Whitman County transfer station to Spokane, place it on a rail car, and then move it west to their landfill. What's that landfill? Rabanco?
Rabanco, yeah.
At any rate, So we thought we would be able to leverage a pretty favorable rate that way. It didn't come in that way. We were surprised, frankly, to see that what we got was a really good advantage in 1993. They thought they were going to be shipping it less than half of the distance they ended up, but because our tonnage is so small compared to what they have overall, we thought at that time that they would just breach the contract and say, we're going to go broke if we do this. As it turned out, they were able to do it, break even at least, and keep their name. And these large landfills make their money on volume. I mean, if they break even on some and make good money on others, they'll continue to do that, and that's what we're seeing now. We were frankly very surprised that they continued with a rate that is very close to the one that we negotiated in 93. And to get that rate guaranteed in the future, subject only to CPI, and 80% CPI at that. The alternate proposal was full CPI for sanitation products, essentially, is what you'd call it. And so it's actually a much different, like a 5% CPI rather than the current CPI for regular products is around 1.6 or so. So we were very favorably impressed with their proposal. They already haul our solid waste now, so it seemed like a no-brainer. In addition, this will take the long-haul contract disposal out as long as the franchise that we have with Latah Sanitation. So in 2035, the long-haul contract will be up for renegotiation. The LSI franchise will be up for renegotiation, but it buys a long, sustainable, moderate growth sanitation system until that time. We've also, by way of history, as Tim indicated, in 1993, when Subtitle D was being enforced by the EPA, we looked at keeping the landfill open where the inert demolition landfill is, or in that same vicinity. It cost way too much for the volume that was going in it. In addition, Tim has been working, I worked previous to this with Latah County and a regional solid waste advisory committee, all the way from Grangeville north to Benewah County, I believe, all of District 2 essentially. And they've tried to find different alternatives, regional landfills. Is it possible to have a landfill in our district? And there's just not sufficient volumes to allow you to have that local control, if you will. The cost per ton far exceeds what we're paying now. So this is a great viable alternative. It's tried and true. We're 25 years into this contract, and it's worked very well. So,
If I may.
absolutely.
Dean Large traveled up from Vancouver today. Dean, would you like to come up and say anything?
Please, please.
He called this morning, and I think he was of the belief that the meeting was this evening. I was surprised to see him here already, but Dean's with Waste Connections, and I've worked with Dean for a number of years.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for your cards.
I had a question for you about the Washtuckna Hooper project. It wasn't economically viable because of volume? Is that why they didn't start that? That never went?
They developed that, or they were going to develop that for a number of different reasons. And one of the big players was Spokane. And when they did the waste to energy plant up there, they just didn't have the volume in this region to sustain that with their larger landfills down on the Columbia Gorge. So they just kind of mothballed it. It's my understanding that there's still permits in place, but I don't know that anything will come of it in the future, the near future anyway.
There'd have to be a number of changes. Some bigger players
Yeah.
would have to come in to
Yeah.
make that worthwhile.
Yeah.
There's some things going on with the, I've heard Whitman County people talk about the possibility that recycling may have to go away in Whitman County because of the costs associated with it. And so there's some balls in the air about where we're going with recycling, and they all could have an effect on this. So I think it's great that we got something out there to 35 that we can is
Whitman
solid.
County's dealing with a bigger problem. They started off taking glass with
Right.
their single stream, and
Yeah.
trying to take something from a program that's already established has proved more difficult than what they thought, which reduces the value more, and it makes that material of far less value. This China ban has raised havoc with everybody in the West and their recyclables, but thus far our folks that are taking ours are still saying no changes. So, and that's another thing we'll be looking at in the master planning process, is doing something to scale here in Moscow where we do some of that separation and gain a little more control over that material, and possibly even create some local jobs and be able to market that material directly to the markets rather than having to ship it to a MRF and rely on that end of it, which that's the largest cost for single stream for us, is getting that material shipped to the Seattle area and the cost of getting the material separated. So
Well, it seems like the contamination rate has to be extremely low for it to have value, and so if we do our own sorting, we could achieve that contamination rate and have our plastic have value where it might not otherwise.
or possibly even do some sort of a hybrid separation where we know what materials are valuable and we concentrate on those materials, and then we ship those less valuable materials off to the MRF, which is a material recovery facility.
Yeah, and then when is the strategic plan that you've been working on for all of the sanitation? Aren't you in a big, when is all that coming up due?
We're actually working on it right now. I'm expecting our first technical memo back the end of this week, the draft anyway, but the whole project is scheduled out into September.
Okay. Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Plus, you start thinking about those resources, and I think that's what people are thinking about. If there's something valuable, we want to keep it so we can use it, and these people that are collecting have a resource.
Sure.
And so people are beginning to consider that, so that's great. Welcome to the Public Works and Finance Committee. Would you just introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Dean Large. I'm the sales manager for Waste Connections. Started it with Finley Buttes Landfill with the old Tidewater Barge Line Group, Wes Hickey and his group back in 1993, and have worked the Pacific Northwest for 25 years.
And you came up today just so you could come and talk about what you do?
Well, I came up just in case there were some questions or things that Tim would want me to say, or just be in support of.
Well, the packet's
whatever
really
you folks-
complete, I have to say. There was a ton of information, and thank you for all the history, and Gary, too. That's really helpful on this end to try to figure out all the details. So do you all have any questions that you'd like to ask?
I would ask him, at this facility, do you guys do like methane to energy recovery at this site?
Yeah, hi, Jim. Thank you for that question. What's very interesting about Finley Buttes landfill is that it's unique west of the Mississippi River in that it's the only landfill that not only takes the methane gas that evolves out of the pile and puts it through some CAT generators producing electricity, which we sell on the grid, but we also jacket the engines with a food-grade heat transfer fluid that then is pumped over to a neighbor called Cascade Specialties, and they use the heat off of the jackets of our engine for the first stage of the dehydration process for onions. Cascade Specialties produces about 10% of the worldwide market for dried onions, and so we're strategically located there and have a great partner in that we do multiple things with the gas coming off the landfill.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to say one other thing with regard to our ability to keep the prices the way it was. I guess publicly I'd like to thank Clearwater Paper for their support for as many years as we've provided service to Clearwater Paper, and without having a contract to remove ash and other residues out of the Lewiston facility, we wouldn't be in a position to continue to provide the cost that we provided for the city. And also, Dietrich Trucking has been a partner of mine since 1993. When I first started in 1993, we were very fortunate to haul 26 tons per load in our trailers. And over the years, he's gone out to Western Trailer and spec'd very lightweight trailers, including possum belly trailers that are built a little bit tougher than chip trailers, and also lightened up his tractors so that we're now able to haul off 32, 33 tons. And I think in the first trial demonstration that we did at your transfer station, we got 34.12 tons. I wouldn't recommend that long-term, but
That's how much you were able to get into the container?
yeah, and we had a little bit of freeboard left in it, which was amazing. But these are all special cases. But it's not just Waste Connections. I mean, we have a team of people that come alongside us and work together to do the kinds of things that we really need to do to keep the environmental side of our world as good as it is. So I just wanted publicly to thank them also.
So out of curiosity, because it's 1,800 acres,
We own 1,800 acres. 510 of those acres are permitted as the current landfill footprint. We've opened up about 110 of those 510 acres. That leaves us about 200 years of remaining life at Finley Buttes at the current rate of fill of about 750,000 tons per year.
We'll be old then.
It's a very large facility on a very dry climate with lots of lava flows underneath it. It's a fantastic place that protects the groundwater, and we do lots of things to keep the air quality good in that area too. So it's.
How far out are you serving? What's your farthest community that you're shipping?
Well, I've barged in material from Guam and Johnson Atoll from Alaska. We're currently barging materials in from Vancouver Island. We service a customer up in Post Falls, Idaho. But most of the time, our market is fairly limited to the Columbia River gorge areas. You really can't drive by too many landfills and effectively provide service. Transportation is a huge component for all of us now that we're in the regional landfill scenario.
anything else? Anything you need to add?
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the information, sir.
Yeah. Well, with that, the recommendation is to send the master service agreement and task order 1 for the services. Oh, sorry, I went down one, sorry. Recommend approval of Finley Buttes Limited Partnership Proposal. Do we need to direct staff to do anything else?
I was just going to ask a summary to make sure I've got it, that you received 2 proposals, and this one was favored primarily for the cost, the more certainty of future cost escalations, and the duration of time that we're signing on for.
I think it's fair to say that both Finley Buttes and Republic, both are respected companies. They have the financial means and the experience to perform the contracts. It got down to the point where we're familiar with Finley Buttes, so that was a mark in their favor. And they had a more competitive pricing. So it seemed to us that it was a no-brainer that everything remaining equal, go with the company that you know and you've had success with and has a better pricing structure.
Makes sense?
I think that we're good. So I guess we just need to put this to where?
Regular agenda. I think it's something that we probably want to talk about a little bit. At this point, what we're asking is the council, when it gets to council, to authorize staff to start negotiating an agreement. We have an agreement with Finley right now, or Waste Connections, excuse me, that was built. It's actually the waste management agreement that was delegated to Waste Connections. So there's some updates. That was a 1993 agreement. Tim's gone through it, I'm starting to go through it, and Mia will also have a shot at it. When we negotiated that, we used a law firm out of Seattle when I was city attorney, so we had never done that before, so we spent a lot of time working on that. It stood the test of time, so I anticipate there will be a few tweaks to it, but it should be fairly painless. But it will take some time to do that. So we're looking for authorization to sit down, approve the selection of Finley Buttes, a limited partnership, Waste Connections, and to direct staff to negotiate a contract, which would then come back to council for final approval.
Would the current contract end at the same, coinciding with October 1st when this one?
Yeah,
were
our
to be-
current contract is, we have one last 5-year renewal on it that we must give Waste Connections notice of by June 1. So knowing that we're negotiating with them, we could negotiate an earlier time, or we could go October 1, which is, we always had the contract start and end on October 1 because that's our fiscal year.
How often do these shipments occur from Moscow? How?
Generally, we ship out 2 to 3 loads a day during a normal week. We obviously have our peak times when school lets out, and and then again when the students return in the late summer, early fall. And it's just busier because of construction season and so on and so forth. But usually 90 to 100 tons a day.
I had a question about hazardous waste. Does that get separated out into
Yes.
a different container even? You don't send it?
We
you don't
use a
have-
completely different contractor for our household hazardous waste, and we have a household hazardous waste facility at the entrance to the solid waste processing facility for paints and home cleaners and stuff like that. Obviously, industrial hazardous waste is not something that we would accept, but yeah, that material is pulled from the waste stream prior to making it to the transfer station.
As we move forward with the strategic plan for our sanitation system, we probably wouldn't hurt us at all to come back and talk about it. It's an omnibus system. We have hazardous waste, metals, recycling, inert demolition, waste which is not shipped. If it's allowed by the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, we are allowed to landfill that locally at a much cheaper rate. So with all of those programs, we separate out what we can process locally so that what's being shipped or recycled is the most efficient that it can be. You don't want to ship concrete halfway across the state of Washington to landfill it when you can do that locally. So Tim's very engaged. In fact, in this legislative session, he went to Boise to provide testimony to the legislature about some regulations DEQ was considering, or the Idaho legislature was considering, about what types of waste can continue to go into the inert demolition landfill. So we're actively working around to make sure that we're providing the most efficient waste system we can and comply with all the regulations by the EPA and DEQ.
Yeah, so you're going in the direction, I was just kind of curious at how it all splits out and how we decide what goes where. Because when you go to the transfer station, you know that all of it is being divvied up. So I think the strategic planning report's going to be super interesting to answer all that stuff. Yep.
Does Gritman have their own contract for their biohazard? That doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, most of the local clinics that have biohazards and even some of the sharps and things like that, most of those folks contract with a company that deals directly with that material rather than putting it in the waste stream. Dentist's office and veterinary clinics and so forth.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Tim.
you.
Thanks, Tim.
Regular agenda discussion item there.
Yeah, that'll be good. Thank you.
Thanks.
We are to item 5, Almond and Second Streets Geotechnical Evaluation Agreement. Hi,
This
Kevin.
cannot happen soon enough.
Good
Hi.
afternoon.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, see ya.
I see, Jim, you've driven that recently, that stretch of Almond.
Oh, yeah.
It's really in pretty horrendous shape. We've had that in mind for reconstruction for quite a while. It's a little complicated in that there's, well, we have a map, and I think it came from maybe the late 20s that shows all the streets that were at once upon a time concrete.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to see, holy,
I even was like, did I read that right?
there are more than you would think, but both Ullman and Second Street both have got, they're on that map, and we don't have a way to confirm those other than drilling and taking cores, but we really want to reconstruct Ullman. In order to determine the most efficient way to do that, we're hiring GPI, which is Geoprofessional Innovation Company, Incorporated, to look at that, the subsurface structure. And what they plan to do is have a sub-consultant using a ground penetrating radar and cover the full width of the roadway from 3rd to A, and also on 2nd Street from Washington to Main, so we can know what's underneath. If we just say we're going to reconstruct it, we don't know what we're going to find. We don't know if there's a foot-thick concrete below just the overlay of asphalt. That would, it could get quite expensive if we had to do that as a change order. So we want to know exactly what's under there and design the best section to replace that. So Geoprofessional Innovation, although the employees have been here for years, the employees that run that company were previously associated with Strata, which we've had many contracts with, though. But because we haven't had contracts yet with geoprofessional engineers, and we assume that we will use them off and on, we need to have a master agreement with them, and that's why this is coming to you. So we have a master agreement, and we also have a task order for this particular work that's in the amount of $14,975 for that service that they're going to provide. So the goal here of this meeting is just to, staff is recommending approval of the master agreement and this task order.
Before I like all of that, can we ever see the core? Because I know the core, unless it
Sure.
comes out, can
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
Like, can you figure out, like, we'll show, like, when all of that was done?
Not necessarily when. With the common practice is just to see what it
What it
was.
is.
I mean, you can tell it's older, but you can't really, I mean, we could probably pay $50,000 and have it dated, I guess, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're welcome to look at the cores when we get them for certain.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
I'd appreciate that. Do you have
Yeah, I
any?
think this is very timely to get going on this because the Lake Dumas property is going to get developed this
Yeah.
year. The new county offices, it's disgraceful the way the street is in front of them. And I think this will tie that all in together and make, as far as the URA is concerned with that, that's part of the URA. We should get going on this as soon as possible. So, yeah, definitely
Great.
recommend.
Do you have
I
anything?
have one question. So, can you just explain what the inclusion of the Second Street portion, the benefit to doing that at the same time, the almond one, I
Yeah.
think everyone's super aware of.
It's just that it's starting to show, it's certainly not as bad as Almond Street, but it's starting to show signs of age, and we know there's some concrete under it. So while we have the ground penetrating radar folks here, we thought we would determine exactly what's under there so we can plan to rehab that in the future.
So kind of cost savings, just do it at the same time instead of
Yes.
coming back in a few
Yes,
years.
I think
Okay.
they'll be here for 3 days, so It does cost more to bring them out, of course, but then we'll get them to do that while they're here.
Yeah, the mobilization costs of bringing the equipment in, having personnel on site, they'll usually give us a little better deal if we can do as much as we can at
Right.
that time.
Just
so.
like having the electrician come out to your house.
Once.
Right. You better have 3 things instead of
Yeah.
7.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, ma'am.
All right, so then we need to recommend approval of the Master Services Agreement and Task Order 1 for the professional services of Geoprofessional Innovation Corporation in the amount not to exceed $14,975.
And that could go to consent if you so desire.
I think it's okay to go to consent.
Yeah,
Right,
I'm
yeah.
okay with it. It's pretty much a
want-
housekeeping.
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and without any further items on the agenda, unless there's anything
Staff
else?
has nothing further.
All right, then we can close. Thank you.
Thank you.